Welcome, and thank you for joining LPG Talks Live. My name is André Pimentel, and I'm with ANOVA, the remote tank monitoring partner and industry council member of the World LPG Association. It is an absolute pleasure to host the last edition of the LPG Talks Live this year. It has been an extraordinary year with great sessions under the LPG Talks Live webinar sessions. And I can assure you that the last one we have for you, it's not going to stay behind it. In fact, this session gets the registration record for the year, which says a lot about the topic and its impact in our industry. First, let me just remind you that this is a World LPG Association meeting and is therefore governed by the World LPG Association statutes, specifically our antitrust guidelines, which prohibits the discussion of commercially sensitive information, such as pricing, volumes, market share, etc. So today, our session is focused on renewable gases and policy pathways to net zero. We have a lot of interest in this session, and so thank you very much for signing up and registering and tuning in today. We hope you'll find this session helpful, productive, and above all, actionable. Spreading the word and acting on this topic, it's a responsibility of all of us in the industry. So before we move into our panel discussion, we'd like to launch a couple of polls. So I'm going to ask to launch the poll. This first one is to understand where are you coming from, which is particularly important as different regions have different policies. And so we would like to understand where the audience is coming from, North America, Latin America, Europe, UK, Middle East, Africa, Asia, Oceania, anywhere else. So let's just give it a few seconds more as we do the voting, as you get to voting. So please do vote. We'll have a second poll afterwards, but in a minute to that. And I'm not sure if we can already wrap it up. And so North America and Europe are very close leaders, 41% and 35%. And we have pretty much a representation through Asia, Africa, Middle East, Latin America, which is great to understand that we have people from pretty much every region. And so thank you again for signing up and being with us today. And now we'll launch a poll focused on government policies and their need to improvement. So if you can help us to understand, do government policies need any improvements for renewable gases in their climate plans? No improvement needed, a few improvements, or major improvements. What's your thought on your government policies in your countries or regions? Or if you're part of a global company, how do you see it, in the framework of those companies? If you can help us to understand that, I think it would be a great segue. Let's just give it a little bit more time. So please do vote so that we can understand if you believe there are improvements needed for renewable gases on the government local policies. And maybe we can wrap it up. Thank you. And without major surprises, I'd say 71% have major improvements are needed, and 100% either a few improvements or major improvements. So clearly, there's a lot of work to be done. And I think this is a great segue into our panel discussion that we brought to you today. And it is now time to present Michael Kelly, Chief Advocacy Officer and Deputy Managing Director of the World LPG Association, will be moderating the panel today. Welcome, Michael. Thank you for being with us. Michael?
On mute. Sorry. Thank you very much for that, Andre. And I was saying, I think that poll gives us a really interesting insight and hopefully will help us build a discussion that we're going to be having today in this LPG Live series, our Talks Live series, Renewable Gases, Policy Pathways to Net Zero. Before we kick off, I just want some housekeeping for those of us that are joining us as audience. You will have the opportunity to ask questions, and we do want to keep this as interactive as possible. So you can either use the little yellow hand, raise your hand, and then I'll call on you, or we'll call on you. Or you can put questions in the Q&A box. Try and avoid using the chat and use the Q&A box. And we promise that if we don't get to the questions in session, we will get to them after session. To make sure that your questions get answered, make sure you tell us who you are and keep your questions relatively brief and to the point. It will help us manage the questions in a way which is more dynamic and keep the conversation going. We have a wonderful panel here today, and I'd like to say hello to them before moving into getting opening statements and then going straight into the Q&A part of this discussion. So we are joined first by our very good friend, Charlotte Morton, who is the Chief Executive of the World Biogas Association. Charlotte, are you enjoying the snow in London?
I am absolutely enjoying the snow in London, and I can't wait to build a snowman and have a snowball fight.
Fantastic, excellent. We're also being joined by Sophia Haywood, who's the Advocacy and Communications Manager for Daimita. Sophia, are you ready for Santa Claus to come?
Oh, yes, definitely. Although I'm very jealous, Charlotte, of the snow. No snow in the Netherlands, unfortunately, where I am at the moment.
None yet. I think it might be coming.
Yes.
And finally, we're joined by Goer Rehman Mir, and I hope I got that right, Goer, the Global Policy Manager, Sustainable Fuels for SHB Energy. Goer, are you looking forward to a little time off at the end of the year?
I am. I think we had a very busy year, but looking forward to the much deserved break, I would say. Yes.
Yes, looking forward to a much deserved break. Absolutely. I think we all are. Well, let's get into it. And let's kick off this discussion. The idea is to try and understand with our friends from the biogas industry what we should be doing as an industry to help governments incentivize LPG. We think that there might be an opportunity, or excuse me, renewable fuels. There might be an opportunity for joint advocacy efforts, joint messaging that we could maybe do with the biogas industry, and maybe we can learn from what they're doing very successfully in promoting their fuel. So let's get the opening statement from Charlotte, and then we'll hear from Sophia and Goer, and after that, we'll move into the Q&A part of our discussion. Charlotte, please. The floor is yours.
Well, Michael, many thanks, and more than pleased to be here and sharing our insights into the policy levers that are unleashing the power of green gas. Biogas is a green gas. Essentially, you put organic wastes, and by that I mean manures and slurries and other agri-wastes, sewage, food waste, and other food and drink processing wastes, sewage, etc., all of which would otherwise be emitting methane. And as we all know, methane has a warming potential which is 86 times that of CO2 when averaged over 20 years. So you put all those wastes into a tank, you deprive it of oxygen, and you let the bugs generate biogas. This green gas can be used to generate electricity or upgraded to biomethane, otherwise known as renewable natural gas, for use in heavy industry, transmission grids where they exist, or as a transport fuel. So not only is it green, but it's also enormously flexible. The biogas industry also produces a biofertilizer. Essentially, once the energy has been extracted from those organic wastes, you've got left all the nutrients and organic matter remaining. And that's critical to restoring our depleted soils. When upgraded to biomethane, biogas generates also a pure stream of CO2 that can be used in industry, for example, in carbonated drinks at Christmas, or it can be stored. Indeed, some people in our industry think that that's the long-term future. In a potential hydrogen future, biomethane can also be used to produce green hydrogen. The UNFCCC says that we've got a decade to decarbonise, and one of the quickest ways of doing that is through tackling methane emissions from organic wastes. The biogas sector alone could deliver half of the global methane pledge and a 10% reduction in total greenhouse gas emissions. So the question is, how do we make sure the industry delivers its potential? Some have sought to grow the industry through environmental legislation and direct incentives, most famously in Denmark in the 1980s. Denmark is now well on the way to having a 100% biomethane gas grid by 2030. Others use obligations, California and Canada, for example, to create a market. The overarching consideration is a carbon tax. And where can biomethane best be used? In the short term, it's as an energy provider that also delivers food security. In India, it's also seen as the antidote to chronic health costs associated with poor sanitation and the annual Delhi smog from burning rice straw stubble. But perhaps our industries more immediately align, where in emerging economies, the burning of biomass causes both tensions and chronic health problems. Samira Bawumia, the Second Lady of Ghana, at our last World Biogas Summit, spoke to the need for clean cooking to prevent millions of deaths and to empower women who bear the burden of collecting biomass. So both today and in the future, the need for biogas is clear. What we must do now is understand how best we can scale up the industry as rapidly as we need to.
Charlotte, can I just ask, where are you growing the fastest? In what region of the world are you seeing this strongest growth, your industry? That might be insightful for us as an industry to hear.
Well, I think that has to be really, well, that's an interesting question. I would say Europe most recently, but now very much in the United States following the IRA. So in both cases, very much driven by policy mechanisms and policy support.
Policy, okay. But it's safe to say that any country that has a big agricultural sector has the potential for having a big biogas sector. Is that correct?
Well, correct. But I mean, it's essentially what we're talking about is organic wastes that we humans directly or indirectly produce. So it's both our own waste as well as the waste that come indirectly from the agricultural sector, but we're causing them essentially.
All right, thank you. Thank you, very interesting. We're gonna get back to you with more questions as we go through our discussion. Turning over to Sophia, who works for the newly established joint venture between SHV Energy and UGI International, Diameta. Sophia, the floor is yours for an opening statement.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for having me here today. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion, and Charlotte, already some interesting things that you've already referenced just in your opening speech. So I think that sets a good tone for the remainder of the session. I completely agree with things that Charlotte was mentioning before, and in terms of the discussion today and the mix of geographies that's represented throughout the audience, and also ultimately, Michael, you know, who you represent as the WLPGA. There are many nuances, many differences, but also I think at their core still quite a lot of similarities, and I think still a very clear importance of being able to work collaboratively and collectively together. At Diameta, we want to support the industry throughout this process in terms of this transition, and it is a transition. It's not something, it's not flicking a switch overnight. It is a process, and depending on the geography, and again depending on the sector, the incentives, the policy, the pressure, it changes things quite drastically. But from a Diameta perspective, as you mentioned, we were established in February this year by SHV Energy and UGI International with kind of two prongs, I would say, of a clear focus. One is around the production of renewable and recycled carbon DME. So we have an overarching target that we will be producing 300,000 tons of renewable and recycled carbon DME by 2027. And then the second part is about accelerating the adoption and working with industry to make sure that things like standards and regulations and the public policy we'll be talking about today is in line also with the rollout of DME to support the industry. So there's kind of two prongs, one on the production side and then one also on the importance of public policy. And I think the fact that that was actually outlined in the ambition of Diameta being established shows just how critical public policy is to everything that we are doing collectively in this space. One thing I would maybe also end on is that there's this balance that we have to strike between being bold and then but ultimately also deliverable. And I think that that is also another key theme, that I don't think that we want to be being too conservative or shying away, but at the same time, it's got to be in a way that's going to work for the industry as well as work for households, businesses, policymakers as well. And that is a dance that we have to dance throughout this process, and that's not an easy one to define. But I think this will be interesting to bring out in our discussion about how we get that balance, because we need to make sure that we do this right as an industry. And I think there's a lot we can learn from people like Charlotte and colleagues at the World Biogas Association and other sectors as well, about how we slot in to this big change that we're all going through. But it's very, very positive to see that this is one of the most registered of these sessions. I think that the appetite and the discussion around renewables is becoming much more commonplace compared to even 12 months ago, 18 months ago at a global level. So again, I think we're all heading in the right direction. We've just got to keep up with the momentum. And on that note, I will pass back to you.
Good. Thank you very much, Sophia. Let me ask something. You said that there's a two-pronged strategy coming out of Daimita that focuses on production and then on policy. And I'll repeat kind of the question I asked Charlotte earlier. So in terms of policy focus, are there regions that you're focusing on, or is this a global effort? How are you structuring this strategy?
Yeah, so our first plant is going to be in the UK. So it was announced in May this year that our first plant is going to be in Teesside, which is in the north of England in the UK. So that's going to be our first renewable and recycled carbon DME plant. It will be producing 50,000 tons of renewable and recycled carbon DME for the UK market. Following that, we're having plants subsequently in Europe and the United States again. But we're also, that's through our one partnership through Circular Fuels Limited, but we're also looking at other partnerships as well. So for example, we recently collaborated with a company called Enerchem to look at larger scale plants around the 150 KT mark compared to the 50 KT one that we're doing at Teesside. So yeah, a mix in terms of geographies, but ultimately I think that we're not alone in this space. There are others, and the view is that as the industry grows more broadly as well in the future, though I'm sure there will be new players as well entering this space. It's all about this global move towards the DME molecule, bringing that into the suite of gas solutions that the industry is looking at.
Wow, that was very diplomatically done. Thank you, Sophia. We'll move over to Goer, and again, keep your questions. I've seen a couple of questions have come in for Charlotte, and we'll get to those in the discussion in just a moment. Goer, please, yes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Very pleased to be here with all of you today. So I'm here representing SHB Energy, where I work as Global Policy Manager. I think I would start with a brief introduction about the company itself, and then I would summarize my opening statement with some key policy considerations that are very useful to achieve net zero objectives. So about SHB Energy, we are basically a global leader. We are a global energy distribution company. We supply LPG, about 5.5 million tons, to 30 million customers globally. We are present across 4 continents in 25 different countries, and we have an employee base of more than 16,000. Within SHB Energy, we are working on a vision that we want to advance energy together. In the short term, we are working towards a commitment that we want to reduce 5 million tons of CO2 by 2025, taking 2017 as a baseline. And we also have our global ambition that by 2040, we want all our energy products to come from renewable sources. This is a quite ambitious challenge. That's why we have focused on investing in renewable energy. And SHB Energy was also is very proud to have pioneered the launch of bio-LPG back in 2018. We got our supplies from Neste Refining in Rotterdam, which we have successfully launched in 12 different European countries at the moment. And we are trying to strengthen our brand and supply of renewable liquid gases by launching a customer-focused brand called Futuria. We have also made investments in production, in producing renewable recycled carbon DME, and then we have joined forces with UGI International under the umbrella company called Daimita, which Sophia has talked about. And as part of Daimita, we are aiming to have 6 different production facilities installed across Europe and in the US. Within SHB Energy, we are also collaborating with companies and research institutions. To name a few, we have announced our strategic collaboration with LanzaTech to pursue on-purpose renewable LPG production pathways. And when I say on-purpose, it means that technologies which could produce renewable LPG with high selectivity and yield. And then we are targeting feedstocks that can be sustainably sourced and are available in abundance. Last year, we launched a global open innovation challenge where we invited knowledge centers and universities from across the globe to participate in innovation program to basically pursue technologies that can produce renewable LPG on purpose. We received 27 different applications, and we have shortlisted 5 winners, and we are very proud to have partnered with them. And this year, we launched Open Innovation Challenge in India. And in that campaign, we have shortlisted 2 different Indian research institutions that we are collaborating with to develop these technologies. So innovation is very key for SHB Energy. And I think innovation will play a key role in decarbonization, in achieving decarbonization objectives. Now, coming to the policies and pathways, I think there are 3 things that I would like to mention. The first thing is that within SHB Energy, we believe that it's very important that policymakers take a mixed technology approach. So all technologies that are available should be used. We need to just find the right place for these technologies in different sectors. But then we believe that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. The second thing is that when we think about technologies and decarbonization, it's very important that we not only take into account the environmental impacts, but also the social impacts of deploying these solutions, because SHB Energy serves consumers that are not connected to the gas grid. These consumers are typically located in rural areas with low levels of income, typically, which means that cost-effective decarbonization is very key, and policymakers need to come up with smart policy solutions, take into account the affordability aspects when we think about energy transition. And the last bit is the temporal impacts of decarbonization. Anything, the greenhouse gas emissions and methane emissions that Charlotte talked about, that you reduce today is worth more than anything that you reduce 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road. So renewable gases are available today in increasing quantities, so they can contribute to decarbonization substantially as we speak today. So in the policies, we need to make sure that these temporal impacts of immediate decarbonization are also taken into account, and we need a balanced approach from policymakers. So I would just stop here.
Charlotte, I saw you nodding in agreement with Goer. Do you want to explain why you were nodding?
Well, I think the point about needing to focus on this decade is really crucial. And in particular, the global methane pledge. We are very, very behind where we need to be in terms of addressing climate change. And methane has been identified as a real opportunity to help us get a little bit back on track. Methane, as I said, is 86 times more harmful. This decade, we have the opportunity, and obviously I focus on recycling those methane emitting organic wastes into biogas. We have the opportunity to do that today. It's a technology that's here today. It's been widely used for decades. We don't have, it's not like hydrogen, which still has a lot of commercial and technical barriers to overcome. So let's focus on doing the things we can do today, this decade, and figure out how to scale them up fast. So to Sophia's point, it's crucial that we agree the strategy and agree the action plan so that we can get those policies in place fast. 2030, the timeline for the global methane pledge is 7 years away. Just think how long it takes ordinarily to get just one biogas plant built. We can do it a lot faster, but it needs this focus and alignment from a lot of sectors and people to agree on the strategy, and then it can be done. But there's a lot of agreement required.
There's a lot of agreement and there's a lot of nodding going on in this discussion. Before I get to Sophia, because Sophia, I want to get your take on this particular issue, but Charlotte, if you could inform our audience of what exactly the global methane pledge is. It came out of the Glasgow COP last year, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. So it was led by the European Union and the United States of America in recognition that methane, because of the particularly damaging damage it does from an environmental perspective and the rate at which it's increasing, is an opportunity to, I think it's bias back 0.2 of a degree in terms of time. So the pledge requires us to reduce global methane emissions by 30% against 2020 levels by 2030.
Yeah.
So it's quite
I
a
know,
lot.
I know you were in Sharm el-Sheikh this year at COP27, as was I, representing the interests of the LPG industry, but I did not hear in the final agreement, whether or not movement has happened or has taken place in the global methane pledge. Is work on that continuing? That moving forward?
Yes, it is, and I think this was happening in there was 2 side ministeriums that took place at COP that I was at, where there was focus on the global methane pledge, and the focus is very much on ensuring that there are methane action plans, so I suppose more countries are signing up to the global methane pledge. There are now over 150, which is great news, and that each of those countries that has signed up to it has a methane action plan. So they don't just sign up to it, they actually have a plan to meet it. And one of the really positive outcomes of COP27, and there weren't really very many, but one of them was that in that meeting, whilst China hasn't signed up to the global methane pledge, they do have a methane action plan, and that is currently going through the approvals process. So given that they are one of the biggest emitters, I actually was quite excited about that when the Chinese delegates came and made that announcement. But it's those methane action plans that are really critical.
Ah, excellent. Okay, Sophia, we saw you earlier when Goer and Charlotte were having this discussion. We were nodding as well. Is there anything you wanted to add to that discussion?
I don't think there's anything I'll probably add. I think it's just that I agree, and it's great to a certain extent to have us all agreeing on these fundamental messages. And we'll get into the discussion, but I think an underlying theme among all of us would also be that we would like policymakers to also be agreeing with us around these key points that the industry and many other stakeholders seem to all collectively agree on. So yeah, that's all I would add probably.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Well, look, I did notice that there was a discussion going on between yourself, Charlotte, and Christoph Reimnitz, who is the chair of the WPGA Working Group on Power Generation. And he asked you, what's the most dominant application of biogas, which I think would probably be of interest to our audience coming mostly from the LPG industry. Can you expand on the response that you gave in the Q&A box?
Sure, and I think we need to bear in mind that the answer to that is always going to be tailored to the market in which the biogas is generated and the energy demands of that market. Initially, when biogas the biogas market started to grow, particularly in Europe, it was used to generate power, but there are now multiple sources of green electricity. So biogas is a gas, and as such, it's got unique properties, and I referred to its flexibility. So now there's much more focus on using what is effectively a finite quantity of biogas, where only it can provide a solution. So decarbonizing heat. There are very few sources or ways to decarbonize heat, so it makes an excellent way to decarbonize heat, and we've got gas grids in many countries, so that's a great way to take advantage of biomethane, and those grids also act as an energy store. Also, increasingly, we're seeing biomethane upgrade either as compressed or liquefied natural gas used in transport, both for mid-range and longer distance transport, because again, there aren't that many solutions, and indeed the shipping industry is now getting very keen on biomethane. So it's really thinking about what's the best use of this very flexible gas where there aren't competing other forms of energy.
And I think that might be something that we in the LPG industry should be thinking about as well. We do have some questions that are coming in, and I'm going to ask this to Sophia and to Goer, because I think this might be a question that you could answer, and I could maybe help as well. So how can associations help and encourage the industry to develop RDME and renewable LPG? And this is from Robert Lonehart. Who wants to take a crack at that? Sophia,
I can take a go first. Maybe reflecting also that before I joined IMETA, I was Director of Public Affairs for the UK LPG Association. So I have been on the other side of the coin as well in terms of working for an association. So Yeah, I'll give it a go. I think in terms of what associations can do, I think associations are really important throughout this whole process. And I think about the engagement that I had when I used to work at Liquid Gas UK, but also in terms of how we as Dimeta are also engaging with trade associations, whether that's at the global level with yourselves, Michael, and the team at the WLPGA, or at a local level, looking at the specific markets and areas and in terms of opportunities for renewable and recycled carbon DME. So I think that keeping associations at the forefront is really important, and member engagement with that is critical, because at the end of the day, the associations are only ever going to be as strong as the member input and member engagement in that. And Charlotte, I can see you nodding, and I think this cuts across any sectors. So I think that it's that beyond the surface level engagement at a policy level that can really help the associations in turn incentivize and work with the industry. I also think that in terms of actually developing renewable liquid gas production opportunities, if that was a little bit more of the angle of the question, then a big question comes into play about carrot and stick and what the balance is between the two in terms of lobbying for and trying to incentivize a better incentive scheme to help make production more cost effective and generating that kind of that drive and demand is one angle. Another angle, I mean, it was mentioned earlier around things like obligation or mandate or even goals as well, to set the scene in terms of that ambition can also be useful. I mean, for example, I know that in Ireland, Liquid Gas Ireland, as well as UK and other countries as well, have ambitions, for example, that are going to be renewable by certain dates, that's based on research that they've done and commissioning independent research to look at this in more detail. That is also something that I think is very beneficial to go through. And again, it's bespoke then to the country and the policy landscape, because there are nuances, we can't forget that, but there's still an underlying theme of bold but deliverable in all of that. Would be my answer to that question. But yeah, keep them close because they're really important.
Keep the associations close. They're really important. I'm not just saying that because I represent the World LPG Association. Goer, would you like to build on that response?
Sophie has pretty much touched on all the points. One thing that I would add is that the national associations can really help us strengthen the message. And I think the messaging is that there is an abundance of feedstock available. And if you have intentions to produce a renewable recycled carbon DME and renewable LPG, basically you are going for indigenous production, and it would ensure energy supply security and resilience to the overall energy system. So I think we need to make sure that we are aligned on our messages across different markets. We sing from the same hymn sheet. And I think this message on indigenous production and energy system resilience would be very key.
Those are really good points. Indigenous production, which every politician likes, and energy resilience, which we're seeing a live demonstration of why that's important in Europe this winter, especially as this cold snap starts to hit. We have a question that's come in from Rainer Puset, and forgive me if I've misspelled your name or mispronounced your name. And I think probably, Goer, you might be the best to answer this. He's asking, what is the green premium for RLPG in Europe?
Well, that's a tricky question because at the moment, renewable LPG is coming as a byproduct of a production technology that mainly produces renewable diesel, or let's say sustainable aviation fuel. So the economics of production are built around those products. And there is no, let's say, market index that would give you a price for bio-LPG. So it's usually linked with some of the other products, let's say with HVO biodiesel or sustainable aviation fuel. So I think that would be a close proxy, but it really depends on a variety of other factors, not just the production costs, but also the incentives in a given market and the negotiation power of a supplier with of a distribution company or an off-taker with a supplier. So there's no exact answer, but that's the reality on the ground at the moment.
But has the crisis in Ukraine, have we seen an acceleration of investment going into renewable LPG, or Charlotte, in your case, into biogas? Has your industry felt the impacts of the current crisis in Ukraine and the upending of energy markets that's created?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have wanted to say I told you so a few times, but because of that crisis, the European Commission has recognized that biogas is a crucial technology to achieve energy security. They've committed in March to a target to produce 35 billion cubic meters of biomethane production annually. That's got the potential to replace about 20% of the natural gas imports from Russia, obviously with sustainable, cheaper, locally sourced renewable gas. Currently, we're only producing, or in Europe, they're only producing 3 billion cubic meters of biogas. So you can see the really rapid scale up that's going to be required to that. I think biogas and biomethane are a star sector. In the latest annual energy report from the International Energy Agency, they're predicting that the sector will grow between 7 and 11.5 times between now and 2050. That's an annual growth rate of 13% to 2030 and 11% to 2050, which would make it the second highest growing sector after hydrogen. Personally, I think we're going to be the fastest growing sector, and hydrogen will be second. My prediction. We haven't got on to predictions yet, have we, for 2050?
No, we haven't got on to predictions, but we're going to get there. So turning to our friends in the LPG industry, Goer and Sophia, has our industry, have you noticed, maybe Sophia, any rush to investment into our DME because of what's happening in the Ukraine? Have you felt that in Dymeta or in this segment?
I think that there's an overarching increasing interest in renewable fuels more generally across the board. Kind of building upon what Charlotte's just said. There is a huge amount of interest, and to be honest, actually, I mean, even just reflecting on LPG week in Delhi not that long ago, it was great to see DME mentioned throughout the week. I mean, there were so many mentions of DME actually, that it was fantastic that it kept coming into conversation. So in answer, yes, there is lots of interest and growing interest in the DME molecule, but I think it's also across the board for renewable liquid gases in general, whether that's for the off-grid applications in terms of renewable LPG or renewable and recycled carbon DME, or on the grid side, as well as Charlotte explained before, and maybe also to a certain extent, as we're seeing in some countries with certain kind of one-size-fits-all policy approaches that are currently being kind of progressed, that actually that's becoming more and more unpalatable to try to sell to the consumer, to the electorate, and perhaps a little bit more of reality sinking in that there is a need, a want, and an opportunity for renewable liquid gases to play a really critical role.
Mm-hmm. So how do we do that? Goer, I'll kick this question to you. From a policy point of view, like there's evidence that it's needed. I mean, we heard from our colleagues in the biogas industry that there's a accelerated growth that they expect up until 2050. What can we learn from that experience? What should we learn from that experience?
I think I would mention some policy considerations again, which I talked about in my opening statement. I think it's very important that we recognize all different pathways that can produce biogases, be it off-grid or on-grid. And we need all these technological pathways for supply security and to also maximize and scale up production. This is very key. And every technology offers different kinds of benefits. We have anaerobic digestion is already mature, commercial, up and running, but we also have potential from gasification technology. We should not forget that, pyrolysis, fermentation, biorefining. So at the policy level, all these technologies need recognition. That's number one. Secondly, I think in different markets, we need the right level of support, financial incentives, tax rebates, fuel subsidies, to make sure that we bridge the gap between the cost of production for renewable gases and the competing fuels that they have to compete against, and then facilitate an environment that is conducive for production and then roll out. And at the same time, I would say that in this whole discussion around energy security and energy transition, we should not forget the consumers. Consumers are very key. We need to bring them to the forefront of this whole debate, make them more informed, so that they feel more empowered, and then they can take the right decisions, rather than policymakers at the top level picking the winners, which might not be very effective when you deploy those solutions in certain conditions. So I think that would also be very key, that consumers feel engaged and involved in these conversations on energy transition.
That's really interesting. And Charlotte, can I ask you that before the crisis in Ukraine hit, and this growth that you're starting to see in your industry, had the biogas industry already done a lot of this background work with policymakers and with consumers to almost prepare yourselves for this? I mean, no one saw this emergency coming, but has the industry been doing this work in the background to kind of make biogas accepted by policymakers? Or is that something, I mean, have you been doing that through the World Biogas Association?
Yeah, I did say at the beginning of my last answer that I've wanted to say, yeah, we told you so a lot of times. We did, I mean, we did the Global Potential of Biogas report, was one of the first reports that we did, just to highlight the potential of the industry, because I think, to Sophia's point earlier, that it's really important that people believe in that potential, and so demonstrating that, putting the data and analysis behind it, ensuring that gets supported. And we shared our data with the International Energy Agency and a large number of stakeholders to ensure that they agreed with it, that we're not trying to overpromise. But yes, we have been providing the data that backs up our potential and communicating the opportunity to policymakers for quite a long time. And I have to say, it's been very frustrating how long it's taken for policymakers to recognise that and to do something about it and provide that support. There still seems to be enormous support for fossil sources of energy, and that seems to still deflect from the green sources that are here today, that need support today, that would have meant that the Ukraine crisis was nowhere near as bad as we're experiencing.
You said you produced the Global Opportunity for Biogas, a study?
It's called the Global Potential of Biogas report. That was
when did you produce that report?
Probably we're 6 years old now. Probably it's 2022, isn't it? 2018, something like that. It's on our website.
Yeah. So that's an interesting lesson for us in the LPG industry, that we have to be doing the background work. We have to make sure that we produce data supported reports and studies and start to educate policymakers as to the potential and the benefits. And Sophie, I see you nodding, so I'll ask you to comment on that.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think that it's a given. We need to have that data, because that is our credibility. Data takes lots of different forms at the end of the day, but I think it's that evidence piece that is the why people take us seriously, and the overall offer that we're bringing to the table. And I think building upon what Goho was saying as well, is a broader level playing field. I think when it comes to things like heating solutions, is ultimately there's definitely enough pie for everyone to have a piece of the pie. In terms of where people are playing the best role, whether that's broader biogas, whether it's renewable LPG, whether it's DME. I don't think there's not enough demand going around for all these solutions. But this picking of winners is really problematic when an industry is going through the stages that I think that we are all going through collectively. High stakes, a lot of opportunity and growth, and I think policymakers can really push that up even further and really make the most of what we have here. One thing that I think is quite interesting as well, and I think this ties into public policy a little bit more broadly, is around a bit of a, if you say gas now generally, and I mean I can't speak for what it's like in every other country, but I feel like there's a recurring theme of gas is bad. And that is something that is still provides an issue when you're having conversations with stakeholders. So I think this decoupling of gas being bad, but actually it's about this transition to low carbon renewable gases is really important. The same goes for the boiler. In a lot of policies, because boilers are something a little bit more tangible, let's say, that they can try to work around or legislate around, the boiler becomes bad, whereas the boiler isn't bad, it's the fuel that goes in it that makes it good or bad. And that again is something that is problematic when it comes down to legislation, because in a lot of countries it is specific more to the technology, i.e. heat pump, boiler, biomass boiler, rather than the actual fuel itself that's going into it. And in a certain extent, I think the renewable liquid gas offering is so good with it being drop-in that sometimes that causes us a problem, which is a nice problem to have, because I think it's a good problem to have. But nonetheless, it's still can't believe we're saying this, seems to also provide a challenge in the policy space.
Sure. Okay, thank you. Keeping an eye on the time, I am going to add...
Sorry, Mike.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Can I step in on this point, because I think this is very key. I think we see these slogans in media quite often now, and it's very important for the industry that we sort of sense check these slogans, and that's why I think there is more than ever a need for evidence-based advocacy that Charlotte talked about and also Sophia touched upon. So I think we need to understand the role of boilers in energy transition. And then these technologies, what kind of fuels do they use and what benefits these fuels bring with them compared to some of the other technologies that are being promoted and distributed at the moment. So I think once you have looked at the data from sustainability perspective, from affordability perspective, only then you can draw like real conclusions. And it has to be fact-based promotion of different energy solutions. Now, speaking of data within WLPGA, and I happen to also chair a working group that is looking at renewable LPG pathways. Michael, you're very well aware. We also published a report last year on renewable LPG, where we looked at a variety of pathways that could contribute to the decarbonization of the industry. It was also presented in WLPGA's annual event in Dubai last year. And what we found out is that considering feedstock competition, you can produce more than 220 million tons of LPG by 2050, all coming from sustainably sourced feedstocks. And these volumes are comparable to the current global non-chemical LPG demand, which is around 210 million tons, if I'm not mistaken. So there is potential. And we have, I think there's also an increasing sense of realization within the LPG industry that we need data. We need to find different sources. So we are also organizing ourselves increasingly to find those data points and then become more prepared when we engage with the likes of International Energy Agency, International Renewable Energy Agency. And the study that we did, we consulted a host of technical literature and started with IEA publications and ARENA publications. So I think we are moving in the right direction, but a lot of work still needs to be done, and we need to collect a lot of more information to be effective with policymakers.
Yeah, and this is kind of the background work that Charlotte was talking about, which, as she mentioned, can be thankless, at least when you're doing it, but hopefully we'll have a big payoff at some point in the future. And I should also say that the study that Charlotte mentioned, we've put it up into the chat, and we'll also put into the chat the study which Goa mentioned on the potential for renewable LPG. Keeping an eye on the clock, I would like to move into a final question for all three of you, starting with you, Charlotte. And this question is bearing in mind the season that we're in at the moment. I would ask you if you would like to receive one thing on behalf of the industry for the holidays, what would it be? What would be the one gift you would ask for as a holiday wish for your industry? Charlotte, enlighten us.
Well, we already have the Global Methane Pledge. And since we can do half of that, as I said earlier, what we now need to focus on is the methane action plans and delivery of the pledge. So our ask, and we are indeed working on it, is a protocol on organic waste diversion and recycling under the Global Methane Pledge.
Okay, yeah, short and sweet and very direct. Okay, Sophia, you're next. What would you ask for from Santa, if you could, for the industry?
I was going to say, I don't have that direct line out of all my stakeholder engagement so far, so I clearly need to do better next year. What would my request be? I think, and this feels a bit cheeky because I feel like I'm asking the request several times over for each nation, but I think it's increasing awareness and recognition by national governments across the board of the work that the industry is doing, because I think there's a huge amount of work that's going on, and actually I think quite a lot of the back work is happening at different stages, at different kind of levels, again depending on the nuances of each country, but I do think there's a lot of work going on, and I would like to see that more recognized by policymakers across the board.
Can I just ask Charlotte, what advice would you give to the LPG industry if we're asking, how can we get our work more recognized by policymakers, given the experience that you've had with the World Biogas Association?
Well, I still feel we've got a lot more to do, but I think it's really important, as we've already talked about, to have the data that's credible data, and to have credible third parties endorse your data, and to really understand the barriers to delivery of it, and be clear what the pathways to ensuring that you can in fact deliver it, and thinking about ensuring those pathways, I suppose, don't conflict with other pathways from other sectors. Because I think one of the biggest barriers that we've all got, or hurdles that we've all got, is the fact that policymakers have choices to make. And if they're presented with too much choice, then they don't make a decision. So I think one of the most crucial things that we could all collectively do is try to not just come up with pathways for our own sector, I suppose, but try to see how we can align those pathways with pathways that from complementary sectors, so that we can all there kind of get agreement on the bigger picture, and that there is ideally there will be one big vision to how we can decarbonize energy, for example, across different sources, so that the decision making falls away. And the decision making is not what we do, but how we do it.
And I'd argue maybe that's why discussions like this are important. Sophie, you want to add to this before I ask Gaur for his Christmas wish?
No, I think I think I completely agree. It's really important. Bringing the broader, having as you say, we don't say one size fits all works all the time, but maybe in this instance, if the heating industry more collectively came together, maybe we could actually say a one size fits all approach we put forward would work. But yeah, in principle, I fully agree.
Gaur, did you want to add to that before?
Yes. You mean to this point? I think the wish that I was going to make is centered around this theme, basically.
Okay, well then, your wish.
I would really wish that key decision makers in different markets and countries across the globe should have a better understanding of energy reality that we are experiencing as a community, like a global community. And I think we touched upon this point in the start of the conversation, that we need to strike a right balance between how ambitious we want to be in terms of picking certain solutions and how realistic it is to practically install them on ground. So there needs to be right balance between, I would say, electrification and also renewable liquid and gaseous solutions, which are in the end complementary to each other. And I'm always a kid who is greedy, who would ask for more. So I don't have just one wish, I have another wish, if you allow me. The second bit I want to mention is increased cooperation in the next year within the broader renewable gas industry. So WLPGA coordinating with WBA, but also across the industry and across different business sectors. And I would just give you an example that within Europe, what we have done is that Liquid Gas Europe, which is the trade association of LPG industry, has joined forces with European Biogas Association, and they have worked on publication. It's called The Strategic Role of Off-Grid Renewable Gases in Achieving Climate Neutrality Objectives. It's data-driven, it's wealth of information included in it, and it's basically explains the story really well, that what we need to achieve to decarbonize those off-grid communities that are really vulnerable. So I think we need to replicate such partnerships at the global level. And I'm very glad to see that WLPG has taken this initiative involving World Biogas Association, and we are learning from their experience, and really hope as we step into 2023, we identify focus areas where we can join forces and then we become more effective for renewable gas industry as a whole.
What a fantastic way to end. What was the name of that study again that you mentioned?
The strategic role of off-grid renewable gases. I can also share the link afterwards for you to circulate with the.
We'll try and find that link and put it into the chat right now for all the people who are watching.
Right.
What a wonderful way to end on asking for the spirit of cooperation between our various different industries. Let me thank my panel for being here today. It's been a fascinating discussion. Charlotte, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you. Sophia,
Likewise.
thanks for being with us. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
And Goer, thank you as well.
You're welcome.
I'm Michael Kelly, and you are watching LPG Talks Live. I'm going to hand it over now to Andre Pimentel, and he is going to wrap it up and show you a very interesting video of an upcoming event WPGA will be holding in Rome next year. Andre, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. What a great session. I'm sure 2023 is going to bring good news for the renewable gases industries and for the LPG industry as well. And just a few weeks ago, we had an incredible LPG week event in the incredible India. And what an amazing event that was. I'm sure for all of those that have been there or online, you felt it the same way. And I believe I speak for all of the industry when I say that we're all looking forward for the next LPG week event. And while we wait anxiously for November of next year, here's a sneak peek of what you can expect in LPG week 2023. And I must thank to all the sponsors, and please do reach www.lpgweek.com and make your way to Rome next year. And this wraps up our session today. I want to thank you all for being with us today and your interest in this edition of the LPG Talks Live, and of course in renewable gases and policy pathways to net zero. Also, a very special thank you to Michael, Charlotte, Sophia, and Goer for being with us today. In case you want to share this session with your colleagues, I'm happy to inform you that this session was recorded and it will be available for all of you. We're launching the normal exit poll, so do provide us your feedback so that we can keep improving. Thank you, and looking forward to seeing you in 2023 for the next LPG Talks Live episode. Stay tuned for more information on that one. Happy holidays to you, all your family and friends, and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.